Hello to all of the audience as well. And welcome back after the lunch break. So we're going to be moving into a panel now on public involvement and normative issues, the impacts of the combination of these technologies in terms of public acceptance, ethical, regulatory, and social economic issues. And our moderator today will be Holger Hoos. Welcome, Holger.
Pleasure to be here.
And I'll let you lead the way, please.
Fantastic. According to my clock here, it's 14:29, so we're starting a little bit early. That's probably okay, right? Everybody's back from lunch. Wonderful. And it's my pleasure to be chairing this Block 3 event. Of course, public involvement, normative issues, very important in the context of ADR technology. So thank you all very much for joining us here. So the first half hour of our event this afternoon is a keynote lecture, which will be given by Dr. Albert Sabate-Coll, who is joining us as an associate professor, actually the Sarah Hunter Associate Professor of Sociology and Director of the Observatory for Ethics in Artificial Intelligence, and coordinator of studies in the Master of Business Economics at the Faculty of Economic Sciences and Business at the University of Girona. Albert holds a PhD in social statistics, censuses and surveys from the University of Manchester, a master's degree in social research methods and statistics from the same university, and a master's in democracy from the Autonomous University in Barcelona. His research and teaching interests focus on social, spatial, and digital or technological inequalities, as well as intergenerational transfers and methodological and computational aspects of the social sciences using censuses, surveys, and massive data, some might even say big data. So the topic of your lecture, Albert, is when codes are not enough, ethical assessment and legal compliance in the age of the AI Act. Of course, we're extremely excited to have you here and to hear your thoughts on this very timely topic. Albert, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Holger Hoos, for this very kind introduction. And also thank you very much to the organization of the European Convergence Summit for the invitation, and also for this very exciting day and agenda of talks, keynotes, and debates. I'm going to share my screen so I can start then my talk. I believe you can see my screen. So as Professor Holger Hoos was saying, I'm based at the University of Girona, where I'm currently the director of the Observatory for Ethics in Artificial Intelligence. And today I'm going to give you a bit of a flavor of what these when codes are not enough actually means, and particularly some of the things that we're doing in terms of ethical assessment in relation to compliance, and particularly legal compliance in the age of the AI Act, which for many of you probably sounds familiar because very recently we have had the European Union basically passing legislation in terms of, or passing legislation in relation to artificial intelligence systems, which basically are systems that we used almost every day in all sorts of things, not only for entertainment, but also for things like medical or health issues, things that relate to transport, things that relate to security, and so on and so forth. And the issue here very much is that we seem to be loving AI, but we are sometimes a little bit puzzled about who is willing to deal with the ethical guidelines of AI. And even more, we sometimes don't know exactly who is willing to take responsibility for the decisions of the algorithms that are related to AI. We could take this even further, and especially in the age of generative AI, and start thinking about what is going to happen in 30 years' time when we are all basically working for AI systems that generate output, and we have a master that tells us exactly what to do. But we will remember why we didn't take responsibility, and that we actually need a business plan. But before that happens, we definitely need to move forward, but also at the same time backwards to think about why we need to bother about ethical principles. And that's primarily one of the key questions, because an ethical principle is a fundamental guideline that'll help us to actually make moral decisions and judgments about what is right and what is wrong. And they basically provide a framework for assessing or evaluating and resolving all sorts of dilemmas, from those that relate to taking privacy as more important versus transparency as more important, or taking into consideration all sorts of conflicts that in many ways could end up in terms of discrimination, or situations in which we end up having less autonomy as human beings. So what we know is that ethical principles are derived from all sorts of sources, and these sources include, obviously, philosophy, but also religious beliefs, cultural norms, and societal values. So that's one thing that could one say, well, that applies not only to artificial intelligence, but that applies to all sorts of things, not only to technology. And that's very, very convenient to think, and also very rarely so. So we need to actually think about the field, or more concisely about the field of AI ethics, which is basically the ethical use of artificial intelligence, which refers to the concerns that arise from the implementation of AI systems in the lives of people and the environment from an ethical and legal point of view. And that basically is one way of saying that we have to ensure that the AI systems do not harm people, nor the environment or other living things and their habitats. So in the field of AI ethics, the central question of whether AI systems can do one thing or another, they can do lots of things, as we can see these days, and we will probably see a lot more things in the coming years. The question is whether and how they should do it. So AI ethics is something that we should frame in, at least in those terms. But one thing we see currently is that there are lots of principles, and especially a proliferation of principles for the ethical use of AI. And at the same time, there is a little bit of a problem, because while we have a proliferation of principles, the application of those principles is very limited, or we see we don't see a lot of companies and public organizations moving forward in the application of those principles for the ethical use of AI systems, and especially according to different contexts. So that's something that we have to bear in mind. But at the same time, while we have this proliferation and the non-full application of principles, we don't know very much when we actually apply principles, whether we are doing a good job. So the assessment of principles, the assessment of AI ethics for the ethical use of AI is very much an important part of the story. But here we depend very much on the available tools, and therefore we're also quite limited. So these three issues are very much what I'll be talking about in my talk today. And why we have an emergence of AI ethics? Well, we have to, first of all, we need to think about that we have to place the whole issue of AI ethics in the fourth industrial revolution, especially with the disruption of AI technologies, but also big data, robotics, and the Internet of Things. And here, some of the critical studies that we have reviewed are saying that we can basically see three types of progress. One which can be seen as genuine and rapid in the area of perception. Here, computer vision has done a great deal of progress. We have all sorts of AI systems that are capable of identified contents. We have obviously the area of facial recognition. We have all the area of health related to the use of AI systems with medical diagnosis through scans, but also that area that is probably very well known to many of you, related to speech to text, text to image, and sound and video, which with generative AI is now very popular among lots of people. But also we have an issue here which is related, which relates to the deep fakes or those swallow fakes. And here the ethical concerns are due to precision. We sometimes don't know what is real and what is actually fake. And not only that, but also the fact that we do not know the data that we are using to train some of these systems. And in relation to that, we don't know whether the data has some biases that will be at some point mitigated, or will be creating some more problems, or will be amplifying some biases, and therefore we will lead, or that will lead some sort of discrimination. So that's one of the areas of ethical concerns related to precision. But as you can see, they have some associated risk, especially related to what is real and what is fake. But then there is another area which is fast improving, and that has to do with the automation of criteria and problem solving, which is something very much in the tradition of computation. And here we have certainly from things that we use every day, spam detection, to things that have to do with detection of copyrighted material, which somehow it's paradoxical in the era of generative AI, in which we have ways to actually detect copyright material, but we cannot enforce the way we actually detect these materials that are copyrighted. Not least because the legislation seems to be not applying these days for some of the companies using vast amounts of copyrighted material. Then we have automation of evaluations, and then we have things like detection of hate speech and recommended systems. Here, there are all sorts of methods that we use, but some of them are very popular, especially heuristics, which are a cognitive mechanism that helps to find correct but imperfect answers to complex questions. Here, the ethical concerns basically relate to automated errors that many are inevitable. So we have to think about ways of minimizing those errors. Otherwise, the problem, the ethical concerns are something that we basically consider as important, and we have to basically think about ways of resolving some of these issues. But then we have another area which is very much related to not improving, or sometimes some people say even doubtful, and that has to do with predicting social phenomena. And here we have a range of issues, particularly the prediction of social phenomena, I mean, like criminal recidivism, predictive policing, predicting terrorism, predicting job performance, or predicting educational outcomes. Here, one of the main issues is that we want to predict behavior, individual or group behavior from many times, in many examples, we find that there is known causal relationships, but we use loads of data that allow us to establish some sort of correlationship or association. But we have to bear in mind that that's not good enough to actually predict social phenomena. So here the ethical concerns are primarily due to inaccuracy and subjectivity, sometimes due to the design of some of the algorithms, but also at the same time with the collection of particular sets of data. And the problem here is that we sometimes dress this as objectivity, but we have obviously a problem, and that's one of the reasons why AI ethics is also focusing on that. So one of the things that this basically means is that we have to take ethics and responsible AI as ways forward to tackle some of these issues that very much relate to ethics, but also to the social impact, and at the same time to the compliance, or if you like, to the normative issues that we are dealing here today in this particular session. So a critical view of AI in ethical, social, and legal terms, we say that is needed. And that is important to be explicit about these terms, because they're not really a complement. This is not just simply about designing a system and then taking into consideration these issues afterwards. We have to do this already when we design a system, when we collect data, and then obviously when we put things together. So we consider there must be validation, internal and external validation, and that means external monitoring and control, as well as agreements, because we have to put forward legislation that somehow mitigates some of the risks, and there have to be contracts as well as standards, as we have in other domains or areas like transport, agriculture, and services. So here, what we say is that it's important to ask and document the choices and the options that we make in order to minimize those ethical concerns that we've seen in these three types of progress previously. Now, when we talk about these issues, we sometimes encounter some debates that are interesting, but sometimes they debates that are taking us to false dilemmas or somehow false debates, if you like, and that is sometimes problematic, because we know that we definitely know a lot more about the impacts of technology, not only about AI systems, but other technologies. And one of the things that we've seen is that ethics and regulation are definitely springboards for technological innovation. So we think that we must move away from the false debate on innovation versus ethics regulation, because we do not want to use technology as it currently is. We know that technology can be greatly improved. And one of the things that we've seen over the past few years is that there is a tendency to use technology that is not ready to use for the general public, but used with the general public as a way to improve that technology. And that is obviously very risky. And we have to bear in mind that if we don't apply ethics and regulation, then there is a point when the public not only do not accept this sort of behavior by some companies, but also it can have serious risks about the harm that it can do to the general public. So we have to apply ethics and regulation to ensure public acceptance and drive transformation and business differentiation around the world by actually applying ethics as well as regulation and considering the social impact of technology. We have done that in the past. We've done it in key areas like in transport and agriculture and services. And we think that we can do exactly the same with AI. And that's not only something that we know from the past, it's something that we have, it has been studied. We have the Turing-Bridge dilemma that basically tell us that when we know a great deal about some impacts of technology, then we should actually be thinking about regulating, because there is a risk of losing control of that technology. And when that happens, it can be problematic, because we move away from a sweet spot or this window of opportunity, and then it can be not only risky for the ability that we have to control technology, but also for the amount of damaging impacts that technology can have on the population. So that's something that we have to bear in mind. And of course, as I was saying at the beginning of my presentation, this is something that for the past 3-4 years in the European Union has been put at the very center stage, to the extent that very recently, last 13th of March, the European Parliament passed legislation, we could even say the first worldwide, or at least the first comprehensive legislation on artificial intelligence worldwide. And it passed by a great majority, which basically means that when it finally unfolds, we will have legislation that tackles some of the issues that we were talking about in terms of risk for perception, but also for automating criteria, as well as for predicting social phenomena. But before I say something about those issues, let me tell you something that perhaps you know, which is that the way the legislation will work is based on risks, and these risks are very much related to some that are considered unacceptable and therefore will lead to a prohibition, and this sort of prohibition relates to the use of AI for manipulation or for exploiting vulnerabilities, or using biometric data for categorizing individuals depending on particular traits, but also using social scoring systems, especially those that very much remind the social credit system from China, but also other things like face recognition scrapping from the internet or from CCTV cameras, or emotion recognition in particular domains like education or our workplaces. There will be exceptions. This is one of the things that we have learned, and particularly in relation to enforcement. But also there are other things that are equally important and relate to the fact that there will be different types of risks depending on where we use AI systems, whether they are used in critical domains like health, like transport. And that basically will trigger a series of strict obligations. And these obligations are very much related to apply ethics, because there will be demands for having general conformity assessments. And that means that we will have to monitor, or we will be able to monitor whether or not some things are done in relation to transparency, in relation to autonomy, in relation to security, and so on and so forth. But also an important element is that there will be obligation in terms of human right impact assessments, which is obviously one of the key issues that many groups, especially civic groups or civic associations, have been demanding for quite a number of years. Finally, there are systems that are considered to have limited risk, but we still have they will still have associated transparency obligations, and that very much relates to some of the basically AI systems that we have today that relate to machine learning, but particularly to deep learning and neural nets. So this is something that will be unfolding in the next few months, first for the prohibitions, and then in the next couple of years when the legislation unfolds fully. But we also have something that is interesting, because it relates to very much to the beginning of my talk, and certainly to the idea of ethics, which is that even when we have systems that imply minimal risks, there will be an encouragement that follows some codes of conduct. And even though we have seen a proliferation of ethical principles, we know that they're becoming, in some cases, like an important element for people, in some cases to rediscover ethics, but in some cases to actually apply ethics in a way that could be seen very competitive for the development of different products and services. Now, let me go a step back, because that's an important, I think it's an important element when we talk about ethics, that the great majority of ethical principles, and especially those that we use in the European Union, have some foundations on the idea of trustworthy AI. And in the European Union, the European Commission's high-level expert group basically proposed ethics based on human rights. And that basically means that even though the proposal put forward by the European Commission focused on risks, those risks also consider these four elements that are related to human rights. And these four elements are basically respect for human autonomy, so to ensure freedom and autonomy of humans interacting with AI systems. This is something that is clearly difficult these days with the use of generative AI, and especially since the advent of systems like ChatGPT. But we've seen very much an explosion of other or a multiplication of other systems similar using large language models. And that's an important element that it's becoming even more important with these sort of systems. Then the prevention of harm. So AI systems that basically should not in any case cause or nor exacerbate harm or adversely affect humans. But also two more issues that are equally important. Fairness, which is a concept that can be interpreted differently depending on the context, but is generally closely related to the rights to non-discrimination, solidarity, and justice. And we have clear connections of these concepts to the General Declaration of Human Rights by the United Nations. Or the European Charter for Fundamental Rights. But also we have a final issue, which is equally important, that is explainability. And as I was saying, this rose very prominently in the debates, not least because of the type of AI systems that we use every day. And here, the key issue is that processes need to be transparent, and the capabilities and purpose of AI systems have to be openly communicated. Not only that, the decisions need to be explainable to those directly that are affected or directly or indirectly affected. And this basically involves that we embrace the idea that we have to be a lot more transparent to the design, but also the outputs to all those people who are basically involved in the processes and necessarily affected by AI systems. But these are not the only issues that we've seen as important in terms of human rights. Human rights are also related to how we actually treat things that are societal, certainly, and certainly the economic or socio-economic impact that can produce some of the AI systems. But also the environment has you know, taken a prominent role, and we consider what Benoist and colleagues basically showed us a few years ago with AI systems that didn't include generative AI. We could actually see that the environment was already an important part of the story, especially if we consider sustainable development goals. But we have to remember that things are moving very fast and moving forward, but in some cases we haven't considered the impacts, especially the carbon footprint of some of these systems, to the extent that they are systems that are incredibly power hungry. And therefore, we have to consider certainly those economic benefits that might produce, and in some cases, the democratization of these systems by using what we see now, the proliferation of LLMs. But we have to remember that there is certainly an element that we have to remember, that these systems require a huge amount of data, but also a huge amount of electricity to be powered. Therefore, some of these systems will have to be assessed and judged accordingly. And we have to remember that these are not exactly the same systems. It's not the same to train a text classification AI system compared to one that generates images. And as you can see, it requires a huge amount of electricity, and therefore it produces a huge amount of carbon emissions. So this is an important element that we have to consider, in addition to those impacts that we've seen that are more economic or social from the three areas of concern that Narayan was actually reminding us last year. So for all these reasons, one of the things that we are doing from the Observatory for Ethics in Artificial Intelligence here in Catalonia at the University of Girona is to develop ways to assess some of these systems. First of all, by doing a review of the sort of ways that we can assess different types of systems with different methodologies and using different ethical principles. But also we need to, make sure that somehow these are harmonized also with the normative issues and therefore with legislation, not only with AI, but also with data and services and so on and so forth. And at the very end, to provide practical solutions, practical applications that are developing these days in relation to these sort of systems, as well as the impacts that they are producing. So that's one of the reasons why we have developed POS models, or PO model or AX-PO model, which is it can be used as a self-assessment model, but also as an assessment model, because we can also do it with the people who are designing systems or applying systems. They don't have to do it on their own if they don't want to. And we do that to advance the ethical evaluation of data and systems of artificial intelligence through this sort of checklist of verification questionnaires that we can show slightly later. Okay. The important part of the story here is that we evaluate a range of ethical principles, not the only that are sort of somehow related to human rights issues or issues that are considered to be important from the AI ethics perspective of 2 or 3 years ago, but from the AI ethics perspective of the last 2, 3, or 4 months. So we are very much thinking about a range of issues here. And as you can see, we assess things that relate to transparency and explainability, to issues of justice and equity, to things that relate to security and non-maleficence, or responsibility, privacy, autonomy, and certainly sustainability. Now, what we do here is we assess the different things that we consider important in order to comply with the legal issues, and particularly with the AI Act. But at the same time, we think that we don't have to stop with some sort of conformity issues. We have to move even forward, because we need to anticipate some of the things that we consider could be risky and are not necessarily included in legal terms. So we provide this assessment. We review, we conduct a quantitative and qualitative review of the responses. That basically means also that we consider that it's important this relationship that there has to be between a developer and the rest of people who might actually be affected by AI systems. And we generate some sort of certification or badge that basically shows that people are moving forward and doing things and are not staying behind in not only in terms of compliance, but also in terms of applied ethics. We also offer the possibility to receive professional and personalized feedback after completing this assessment criteria or process. And therefore, we want to make sure that by doing that, our ecosystem is not only compliant, as I was saying, in terms of the legal terms, but also in terms of applied ethics. Now, one of the things that we notice is that everything is getting a lot more complicated these days, especially in terms of paperwork on demands that are placed on public and private organizations when it comes to conformity. And so one of the main objectives that we noticed when interacting with different agents is that we have to make things simple, even though we are dealing with a great deal of complexity. But it's always important in ethics to ask questions that really are general, but at the same time specific. And the sort of the main general question is whether or not we have done something in relation to some of the all of the principles that we have already shown. So that is an important aspect of the assessment criteria, and that is an idea that we develop by at the same time developing systems, but managing and leading all sorts of projects that relate to AI. And related to that, we are concerned, or we are thinking about different stages of the life cycle of an AI system. We have, all sorts of projects. Some of them are, at the very beginning and in some sort of design and modeling stage. But in some cases, we find different systems are already deployed, or they require refinement, and therefore we need to be ready to assess systems of all sorts at different stages. So that's an important question that we have worked on, and that's one of the reasons why we believe that the PO model is very, very appropriate for answering some of these critical elements. Generally speaking, we can say that this PO model has these 7 ethical principles. It has 70 questions. That doesn't necessarily mean that it has 10 questions per principle. And the important part is that we can observe some of the things that we are doing, and then mark the progress and see whether or not we can do something in order to improve the systems or the data that we use, and the steps that are required in order to comply with the regulation, but at the same time to go in some cases beyond what regulation is requiring. Very schematically, this is how it works. We present the principles through various indicators. Very schematically, we collect data, ones and zeros. We also collect qualitative information. We also collect the probability of anticipating an action in relation to a particular issue that relates to a particular principle. And from all that information, we provide, global indicators, some metrics that are very general, some more specific. But at the same time, the issues that require a great deal of attention and that relate to different types of risk, and the probability that has been specified in relation to those risks, and therefore some sort of severity matrix that allows us to see whether or not we have some sort of information about the progress that different agents are doing in relation to the use of AI ethics in their respective organizations. Here's the very much the snapshot of the global metrics that they receive, but there are a lot more metrics. I'm just going to show the main one. And we think that it's important to have these sort of elements because we are talking about an ecosystem, not only here in Catalonia or in Spain, but also in Europe, which requires these sort of tools that allow the application of ethics when it comes to AI systems of different sorts. If we do not provide this sort of assessment criteria that is readily available, we think that we're not going to make progress as quickly as we anticipated a few years ago. And therefore, we, as one of the pillars of the Catalan strategy for artificial intelligence, we believe that that is one way of pushing things forward. Just to wrap up, I'm going to just click here to show you very quickly how this works. So this is a video. I hope it plays. And well, this is the actual model. The video should be well, if it's not here, it doesn't matter. I think we might actually not have it here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the presentation here. And if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer. And yeah, I will leave it here. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Albert, for this really insightful presentation. Lots of interesting aspects there. And I think that perfectly sets the stage for our panel, which we're going to start now immediately. I think this will connect very nicely into many of the issues that you have mentioned here. So on our virtual stage, I welcome in alphabetical order, Reinhard Lafrenz, the Secretary General of EU Robotics, which is one of the founding organizations of Adra. Chiara Venturini, the head of digital and economic development at Eurocities. In case you don't know what Eurocities is, that's a network of large cities in Europe, established in 1986, and today including over 200 of Europe's major cities from 38 countries, representing over 130 million people. We now also have Andrea Čović-Vidović, the deputy head and the head of the media department at the European Commission representation in Croatia. And last but certainly not least, Thea Jacula, the head of the Laboratory for Energy Efficiency, an associate professor at the Faculty of Mechanical Engineering and Naval Architecture at the University of Zagreb in Croatia. Thank you very much for being here. We have a somewhat tight schedule because there are 6 questions we are planning to discuss. So I kindly ask you to keep your answers to these questions really brief so that we can hear from everyone and that we have some sort of a lively discussion going. And then if we are left with time at the end of the 6 questions, which I really hope will be the case, we can sort of open it up a little bit more widely. And the question that I would like to start with is the questions of importance. Why is ADR technology so crucial for European citizens and businesses? And why is it important to develop cutting-edge ADR technologies for us here in Europe rather than just having them provided, for example, by a US-based company who are already doing a pretty good job of that? And so I'd like to start actually with Andrea, who, working for the European Commission, certainly will have a view on this. Please, Andrea, and if we could keep it brief, sort of, 1 minute per questions per person, that would be brilliant, because then we can get around to everyone. Andrea, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I will try. I'm from the Commission. We like to regulate, and regulation usually contains a lot of pieces of information, but let me be just brief. Only 5% of EU consumers who encountered a problem in buying a product or service and took subsequent action, they actually reported it to an alternative dispute resolution body. Only 43% of EU established retailers are actually aware of this scheme. So we need to work on awareness raising. We also need to work on improving access to ADR tools in cross-border disputes. We need to simplify procedures and reporting obligations to all actors. What we've decided and what we started in October 2023 is to review the existing resolution framework in Europe. We want to motivate online marketplaces, but also trade associations to align with the directive. But we also are bringing in user-friendly digital tools instead of previous platforms, the platform which was rather user-unfriendly. So it's going to be a big push from the Commission side to simplify what needs to be simple, to be relevant and usable in Europe, rather than, as you said, resorting to using it through third parties, through the US if you want. I hope I was brief enough.
Oh, you were totally brilliant. And you touched a few on these issues that we're discussing today. So this is great. Let me next perhaps go to Chiara, who is thinking of European cities, I suppose, right? So Chiara, why do you think is ADR technology so crucial that the Commission, as Andrea just said, should pay that attention to it and actually, spend so much effort and also public funding in not only regulating it, but also stimulating its development in Europe? Why do you think is that so important?
Yeah, just technical verification. You can actually hear me all right?
Before I start.
Perfect. So the thing is, we see in trade a recrudescence of protectionism. And so I think we need to be careful not to go into protectionism disguised as safeguarding European interests and competitiveness. I think the real point here is that technology is a very useful enabler of other policy goals. And so our member cities want to deploy technologies to support them in achieving their climate goals, their efficiency goals, and so on. And so having something that is developed in Europe can really help taking advantage of the flexibility of the technology to really deliver solutions that are tailored to the very specific needs of each local administration. And so in this sense, it is really important to have the European dimension in mind and to start from those goals that we have in Europe. I do want to mention, however, this should not happen in isolation just because we do something in Europe, because that can deliver best for European local administrations and consumers and businesses. It doesn't mean we shouldn't look at what other jurisdictions are doing. And so if we take the example of different sectors where I also have previous experience, in the chemical sector, we have very, very fruitful collaboration in international forums that delivers for everyone. When you have collaboration at OECD level, for instance, you have standardized tests, and on the technical components of digital technology, that is really, really interesting because it allows you to have standards that operate worldwide, that support interoperability, and that support businesses in being competitive worldwide.
Great, thank you very much. And I noticed that you also put some emphasis not only on sort of, keeping an eye on the global competition, but also on the fact that perhaps if cities and public bodies invest into European AI technology, or at least also invest in that, that could stimulate the development of that technology, right? So that's an interesting aspect too. Reinhard, I'd like to come to you next. You guys are doing AI-based robotics and also other important aspects of robotics, and I'm wondering, how would you explain to somebody why this is actually so important now, as opposed to 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
Yeah, I think on the one hand, we have a societal element. We have aging society. We have job demands in many sectors. And a lot of things can only be covered by introducing more technology aspects. And this holds also true when you look, for example, at the industry base. We have a lot of SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises in Europe. And if you want to be still competitive in 10 years, we need to enable them to be competitive also in a global market. And here, this can only be done if we include more technology that enables them also to advance in their production, but also in their products. And this cannot be done without the modern technology. And therefore, we have to think of both. On the one hand, strengthening or keeping at least the industrial base of Europe with all the SMEs, and on the other hand, also looking at the societal aspects. And of course, there are many things which are not job related, but also in healthcare, for agriculture, it's also an industry kind. But all these aspects require things, looking also, for example, the average age of farmers. We want to be not in a position that we need to import our food in the long term, but we need to be able to produce it ourselves.
Good. So thank you for that, Reinhard. Thea, let's move to you. I mean, we've already heard a lot about what makes ADR technology valuable and important. Why ADR technology? There are many other kinds of technology. What makes this different and special, other than people being very excited about it? But why should we be excited about those particular sets of technologies, perhaps even more than we are about others?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, my field of expertise is energy, but I also work a lot for European Commission in terms of defense industry, right? So energy and defense industry, both extremely important sectors where we see tremendous opportunity through the use of artificial intelligence. So I can just give you one example. If we talk about energy industry, we see that using artificial intelligence, for example, with relatively small investments, you can achieve huge impact, right? So the return on investment of such technology is usually smaller than some previous technologies that we have seen before, such as renewables. So it offers huge opportunity for improvements with relatively reasonable costs. On the other hand, I would go back to the first question. Especially in energy and defense industry, we see this huge importance of developing your own unique technologies, right? Like when this whole when we see in recent years what was happening during pandemics, and then with the war in Ukraine, it became extremely clear why is it important to have at least some level of self-sufficiency as a country and as a Europe when it comes to development of such technologies. And of course, the compliance to European market is sometimes completely different than if we talk about the United States or some other markets. So technology that has a great potential with relatively low return on investment, but then some huge benefits if we manage to make it European based in terms of technology development.
Thank you very much, Thea. I'd like to return to Andrea here for a second. You already mentioned regulation, right? And I think now we got from the other speakers also a sense for why maybe regulation in this context is urgent and important both, right? And the Commission, of course, has been very active at this. So my question to you and then also to the other panelists is, what is the level of regulation that actually serves innovation, but also keeps us in a space that puts people before technology, right? And that also maybe puts the benefit of people before just profit in the marketplace. And where do you think that Europe stands regarding regulation, given, of course, the enormous effort that the Commission and the European Parliament and the member states have put in to get us as far as we currently are with the regulation? Of course, there's still quite a ways to go.
Thank you so much. This is actually one of my favorite questions, especially when we speak about innovation and regulation, even in the same sentence. So whenever there's any doubt for the Commission, we do a study. So we conducted a study, for example, how the EU legislation can enable or disable innovation. And our findings were that regulation can actually be a powerful stimulus to innovation. I will just give one example, the recent AI Act. It allows for so much innovative potential to develop in member states through these so-called sandboxes for everyone developing this technology before it enters the marketplace. So sky is the limit with innovation. But then you mentioned a key principle, if you want, of all EU regulation, and this is the human being in the center of it. When we look at the values of the European Union that we all share, when you look at human rights, but also if you look at consumer protection, we are regulating these things, technology as well, if you want, to protect the individual, because there is profit and we live in a market economy. In economies, the EU market is a single market bringing us multiple benefits, but someone needs to think of the consumers, of people as persons with their human rights. And that's why we jump in with regulation, but always working to have in mind both the protection of the individual, but also the need to allow technology to develop further so that Europe can really prosper, so that we can be globally relevant. So this is sort of my key takeaway. We regulate, but we need to pay close attention that regulation does not stifle innovation, and also always going back to the human-centric principle of all the EU laws that we've created so far.
And it's great that you mentioned the human-centric approach, which of course has been key to the European Commission's and the member states' approach to AI overall, and also distinguishes us perhaps from other places on the planet that are currently maybe leading a little bit in AI development. Albert earlier said in his very nice keynote that it's a bit of a false dichotomy to talk about innovation versus regulation. And Andrea, you just said this as well, right? Regulation done right can actually stimulate innovation rather than stifle it. Thea, you are, amongst other things, a researcher. What do you think? Are you worried that your research, the innovation that originates at your lab and labs like yours, might be affected negatively by the AI Act as it's coming in?
No, I agree with Andrea. I think it can be very positive, which, we have examples of regulations being very positive, for example, in European Union. So if we talk about buildings, Europe has the strictest regulation of probably any country in the world, which, brought a lot of advancement and innovation in the building industry. But I think there are two main things to have in mind. What we see that sometimes, those regulations are being brought by people who do not have a lot of expertise, or are not in the field, let's put it that way. Those regulations or certain policies are so generic, or should be consulted with practitioners to see whether they make sense. So that's the first thing. We see having such strict regulations that the amount to build a building becomes too expensive to actually build it, right? So there are many issues such as these. And then the second one is that I think we are kind of slow in changing the mistakes, or like fixing the mistakes, right? So Europe has a tendency of making like regulations, but then you make a mistake, right? And you need to be able to fix it quickly. And this is where I would like to see more advancements. So regulations can be excellent for innovation, but we need to have iterations that are quicker than currently the case, because the technology development is just so quick that this is too slow what we see currently in the market.
Very nicely said, and obviously a big concern. So Chiara, I'd like to move back to you. Thea just mentioned building codes, for example, which is of course one of the things that makes presumably our cities better, right? And better for the people that live there in particular. I'm curious, what is your thought about this regulation versus innovation, right? I mean, I guess we all agree that there is space for doing regulation in such a way that it's actually beneficial, not just for those whose interests we need to protect, but also perhaps for those who develop then cutting edge technology. But there is obviously a risk of going too far and slowing things down, especially in an international competition. Is that something that you're worried about with respect to the AI Act and similar initiatives?
Well, I don't think that it's necessarily regulation versus innovation. I think the key point with regulation is that the regulatory framework needs to be predictable, because the entities that operate under a certain regulatory framework needs certainty about what the rules mean, who has which responsibilities at what point in time, and what the penalties for infringement are. And so I think in Europe, we now have a number of significant pieces of legislation on the digital topic that were passed in the mandate that I just concluded. So I think that the devil, if you want, will be at the implementation stage and seeing how this will be implemented in practice. For AI, for instance, we have now a very comprehensive framework that I think is extremely ambitious and can really deliver. But we also know that there are a number of additional acts that need to complement it. There are implemented acts and delegated acts and guidelines that will need to be developed. We have an AI office that has just been launched, but still need to be fully staffed. So we will need, I think, to keep a close eye on the implementation of the regulation. And from CETA's perspective, this is particularly important because as deployers of technology solutions and potentially AI solutions as well, they will need to be very clear about what their obligations are and how they deliver solutions in a way that keeps protecting their citizens' digital rights. Also, in terms of regulation, one thing that we would like to see in the new mandate is to continue working on the topic of business to government data sharing in particular. You will normally hear it in the abbreviation B2G, because there is a lot of data that is for the moment in the hands of the private sector, and that would be extremely useful to local government at all levels, cities, municipalities, regions, and so on, to implement their policies and to make the services they deliver to their citizens even better. And so increasing the sharing obligations for private companies to share their data with local governments is one of the key things where we think the EU should support cities and regions.
Great. So Reinhard, just very briefly, because I would like to give Andrea, who unfortunately needs to go to Brussels very soon, one more chance to share some insights with us. But Reinhard, very briefly, EU Robotics has a lot of industry members, right? These industry members would be particularly concerned about these implementation challenges that Chiara just mentioned. Can you briefly say something about that?
Okay, I think one of the big things is the role of the AI office, and the AI office needs to be very, very clear on how to implement the AI Act, especially. And here there is a lot of harmonization needed. We need to check existing standards. We need to check existing sectorial legislation and regulation. For example, a medical device could contain a small bit of AI. Is it then automatically something under the high risk, which needs an external certification, or is a very small piece, which could also be done in a classical control, but an AI piece might work better, still something to be considered as the determining element for the whole thing. So this is just an example to see how this implementation needs to be discussed with the industries. Sandboxes like that are needed. And here we need to find a good way of cooperation between the ADR communities and the AI office.
Yeah, indeed. And as was said before, the devil is certainly in the details. So Andrea, one last time before you have to leave us, back to you. On socio-economic issues, right? So ADR technology, some of you have said this before, they might be actually key to mitigating socio-economic issues, also in the case, in light of changing demographics, right? Shortages in the labor market and so on. Do you think that here in Europe, we currently are on a path that just makes sure that all of this is going to work fine with ADR technology? Or is there actually a risk that we see something that's happening in the US already very clearly, that there is a huge concentration of power and capital surrounding those who effectively deploy this technology, sometimes at the cost of the ecosystem as a whole? Is that something that concerns you?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm going back to the person being important to the EU, the human being in the middle of it. So I need to share again some insight from a study, again from us. It's entitled New Technologies and Digitalization, Opportunities and Challenges for the Social Economy and Social Enterprises. So our findings were actually that digitalization can underpin the creation of innovative social services and even working conditions. This can actually contribute to solving some existing and some other new social and societal problems that we might not be aware of in this actual moment. So I would say our stance is that the integration of digital platforms and technologies into the social economy, there needs to be a strong social component. It can really enhance the scope and efficiency of us as a society. So I will look at the positive side. I will be inclusive. I will not reflect on what you said about the US, because our focus is to make technology work for everyone. So this is very connected to demography. It's connected to challenges on the market, on the marketplace, really, with persons not being up to the skills we need. So we are insisting on lifelong learning. We are educating employers as well, not just those seeking for a job, to invest in their skills of the future. And I would say our trajectory is firm. Technology needs to have this social component as well. And we need to have a strong economy, but not with discrepancies that would not be, once you have those huge discrepancies, technology, as Thea said, is just simply developing so quickly, we cannot allow ourselves to exclude anyone from technological advancement. So all of our regulation, again, is directed towards inclusiveness, if I answer.
All right. That is excellent. No, and the focus on inclusion, of course, is very welcome. We'll discuss this with the other panelists a little bit later. Andrea, thank you so much for being here. I think we have to have you go on your way to continue doing the great work that you guys are doing in Brussels. Of course, you're irreplaceable here, but we'll make a feeble attempt at replacing you with somebody who is not really a replacement, but who has already demonstrated that he's a very worthy addition to this table. Albert, would you like to join us here in the panel and share some more of your insights with us after Andrea has left? That would be marvelous, I think, so that we also keep our strength here in numbers. Thanks again, Andrea.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the talk. It was very interesting.
See you. And I see Albert smiling, so I think he's in. That's fantastic. So maybe we'll immediately continue with you. I mean, you've talked about many fantastic things. You talked about this false dichotomy of regulation versus innovation. So now we're on the topic of socio-economic issues. Do you think that there is a risk in Europe, if we don't do this right, that actually the sort of social inclusiveness and cohesion, but also sort of the economic model that many European countries have, that is much more based on smaller and medium-sized enterprises than is the case in other jurisdictions, that might actually be at risk to the detriment of Europe and Europeans? Or do you think that, surely we are on the right path and all we have to do now is execute competently and everything will be fine?
I think this is an excellent point. And I think it very much relates to whether our agendas are very much short-term or mid-term or long-term. I think we have a great opportunity to anticipate that when it comes to technology, we have to invest heavily, but we also have to have some sort of regulations that allow a very important point, which is the acceptance of individual citizens and people to actually use that technology. I sometimes worry that some of the cases that we see in other parts of the world might be actually affecting the way people use technology in Europe when we're actually regulating not to have those risks. And that's actually what we have to do. We need to convince the rest of the world, and particularly the US and to a certain extent China, but that's another matter. We have to convince them that we have a much better technology when it comes to public acceptance, but also not only public acceptance, but also much safer technology. It's not an easy thing, especially in times of acceleration. However, I think the agenda of the European Union is not one in which we're all thinking about what's going to happen in the next 3 or 4 or 6 months. I think we're thinking about the midterm, and the midterm is particularly interesting. But we have to make it work. That basically means that we cannot just simply sit back and see whether or not this regulation will unfold easily, because it's not going to happen. We have to make sure that everybody embraces regulation from a competitive point of view. I'm using this point, which I previously mentioned, which is that as many people use technology in Europe as in other parts of the world. Otherwise, this is not going to work.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense, at least to me. I'm looking around the table. I thought I saw somebody else perhaps nod a little bit to this. So let's see whether we have controversial opinions on it. I'm curious, Thea, from your perspective, how do you see this going? Is it the case that sort of we're naturally, from an engineering and science perspective in Europe, on a path that makes us develop technology that is better on the metrics that we care about, which includes, like, general accessibility, respecting the rights of consumers, and so on? Do you think that trajectory is strong enough that our technology will sort of hold its own in the market, or do you think more needs to be done in order to assure that we have that kind of technology that's not only good for Europe and Europeans, but also is globally competitive? Do you see a tension there?
Well, again, I can only talk from the aspect of what is my field, which is, again, energy and building industry. So here, to be honest, I don't see many differences in the approach between, the US and EU. I collaborate a lot with the United States. I did my PhD there, so there's a strong collaboration still with the US. But what I see is still missing is, when we say human-centric, it's usually something, that stays only, a letter on the paper, because, still there is not much interdisciplinarity in terms of including psychologists, etc., in developing such technologies. So this is something where, engineers are developing something for humans, but then the input of humans is kind of missing in this whole picture. And I can just give you one example. We are developing human-centric control, where the idea is that using the artificial intelligence, we will be able to create your avatar, right? So you, Holger, will have your own avatar, and he will know everything about your preferences regarding your, preferences regarding the temperature, humidity, etc. And then we will control the building using your avatar. And this is easy, right? As engineers, we created that, that's great. However, in order to know your preferences, we need to learn about you. And for that, we need data. And to, somehow as engineers, somehow as people who are designing these systems, we are thinking it will be easy to design these systems, but it's not that easy, because when we do surveys, only 55% of people actually wants to share their data, right? So we see this huge level of skepticism and fear toward the new technologies. And I think, education will be the key, both, in Europe, but other countries as well, trying to make these technologies closer to people, to generations that will be using it. And unfortunately, our education system, again, needs to go faster with the development of technology, which, we still don't see happening at universities.
All right. Thank you for that. Chiara, maybe we'll go next to you. I see you've already unmuted yourself, so you have something to say about this. But I'd like to at least encourage you to sort of consider an additional question here, which is, what we just talked about is essentially sort of also the ethical development of this, right? And how much of their data people feel comfortable being used for the development of avatars or other useful technology actually differs between people, differs between cultures. So it can be a pretty individual thing. And certainly it's one where different cultures actually have different standards, right? So I'm curious, especially in the light of recent developments such as Meta, for instance, lobbying heavily in the EU for having more access to our data to the extent that it causes concerns and public debate. Chiara, do you think that in Europe these concerns look a little different seen through European glasses than elsewhere in the world? And do you think that kind of means that we have to also think differently about the technology that we develop? For instance, because we might have less data available?
I don't think it's just about the amount of data. I think it's the quality of the data and also the degree of human control in automated processes. And I think we should probably not be too, enthusiastic about our European different way of doing things, because and talk about these problems as something that might arise in the future, near or distant, because we already have very concrete examples of automated decision-making systems in Europe going spectacularly wrong and affecting people's lives in very, very significant ways. You might be familiar, and if not, you can look it up online, with the Dutch benefit scandal, where a number of people who were receiving social benefits a few years ago were mistakenly flagged as abusing the system and kicked out of social benefit system that they were perfectly entitled to. So this can have very serious consequences on people's lives. And so the thing is, we are only as good as the information we have. And so from the point of view specifically of a city administration, but of any entity that makes decisions based on data, when those decisions affect people's lives, we need to make sure that the quality of the data sets that we are using to train those automated decision-making systems are good quality. We need to be sure this is where inclusivity comes into play, because that data needs to be representative of the different categories of users. And we need, as Thea just mentioned, to be open about failure as well. And so we need to recognize when there are problems in order to sort them out. And again, I think the key is to starting from the problem you want to solve, rather than having technology for the sake of technology, but try to map out what is the process I want to improve, what is the situation that I want to make more efficient, and then look at what kind of technology gap you need to address in order to reach that goal. And that is how you keep people. It's not that you have to bring people into the process, you start from that point.
That sounds a little different than what we've experienced with ChatGPT, right? Which seems like an amazing technology that was rolled out without anybody really knowing what it would be good for and letting people figure it out on the beta, basically. Sorry, couldn't help but remark that.
Yeah, absolutely, but that is how you end up then with lawyers using ChatGPT and quoting cases that actually never existed, and so on. You need to have a level of human control in the process.
Yeah. And I mean, the Dutch government scandal that you mentioned, it's worth mentioning that this essentially brought down the Dutch government, right? So that wasn't just some little scandal that, as you say, correctly hurt people. It also hurt the political decision makers quite badly who were involved in that. Reinhard, I'd like to actually come back to you and sort of steer a little bit towards the job market, right? I mean, people that don't know much about robotics often see robots sort of as the main threat to their jobs, right? I mean, the job that I'm doing today, maybe tomorrow a robot can do it. And that used to be factory jobs. It used to be manual labor. But since the advent of generative AI, creative jobs are also under pressure. So if we sort of take a broader view of robotics and automation, which surely you have in e-robotics, I know that because we talk often, what would you say to these people, particularly given that there are figures out there, maybe not so much in Europe, that say, sure, let's just make robots that can do anything that a human can do, right? And I mean, that causes concern with people. What would you tell them from a professional robotics perspective? Should they be worried? What is e-robotics, for example, doing? What is Adra doing in order to make sure that we don't go into a situation where sure, we don't have to worry about labor shortage, but we also have, you know, a ton of people who don't have meaningful jobs to do anymore. Is that even a concern we should be having?
Yeah, I think coming back to one of your first points here, this kind of general purpose robot, I think technically we are far away from it. So we will still have quite a number of years where you need to develop a specific robot, even if some Teslas or so claim they have something which could do a lot. This is also limited to certain environments. If you want to replace humans, in many cases it makes sense. All this classical saying of dirty and dull jobs and repetitive jobs. And in these areas, we see actually, in many cases, also a labor shortage. On the other hand, the non-physical things, I think this is something where people don't see how quickly jobs could be replaced, even for programming. A lot of things which are done manually, you can easily create with ChatGPT or similar technologies a good skeleton of code to just use and maybe debug first. But for actual robot, I think what we need to always consider is that we need to have the public acceptance here in terms of safety. And I think what we did not talk about yet in this panel was the actual physical safety of devices. And this is the key for everything for human acceptance in this world, be it a regular car, which has a lot of assistance systems at the moment. And even then, the ethical question comes, should a system overrule the human? Should it take control? In contrast to what Albert said, the human needs to be in control and needs to be the one. But if it's safety, if it can avoid a crash, what is the best ethical approach to it? And similar things can already also be transferred into industry applications, into medical devices, and many more of other application areas. But you need to look in each application scene. And I think this kind of market pull, where also the market wants this technology, this is also an important factor, and then starting to raise awareness.
Thank you very much, Reinhard, for drawing our attention to this issue of safety, robustness, reliability, for which I guess European technology is actually quite well known, right? Europe has standards that actually are admired elsewhere in the world for exactly those reasons, right? So Albert, I see you nodding there. I'm curious, do you think with our European ways of approaching, let's say, engineering tasks, but also maybe production, that we might have some sort of a competitive edge or advantage when it comes to making safe and reliable systems? And do you think that perhaps could also become a distinguishing factor in ADR technology? Maybe could we be the ones who make more reliable, safer, and maybe also more sustainable ADR technology than maybe others in the world? Could we take the lead there still?
I think the short answer is yes. It might actually sound very hopeful, but I think the short answer is yes. But it really depends on the amount of funding that we actually employ. This is not going to happen without a huge amount of investment. And one of the critical issues here that it's clearly differentiated with the US ecosystem is that we don't have private funding investing heavily in research for this sort of AI systems that are very much reliable. At the same time, we have to remember that we have some assets that we could exploit. Of course, we have the transportation industry that is very much being exported all over the world, and we have very much this industry that operates to a certain extent now with some protectionist elements there. However, we have other things, especially in the public domain, that can be seen as a model for improvement. For me, one of the key elements is not just simply what the industry does, but also what the public administration is actually doing in terms of embracing some of these changes. many, it has already been mentioned here that we don't have to actually think about Europe as the only place where some things happen in terms of human rights issues. But one thing that we do actually have when it comes to public services is that we have very strong welfare systems. And that's not a small element. When you have a key, very important welfare systems, one of the things that you do is you collect a huge amount of data. And with this huge amount of data or administrative systems, if you like, big bureaucracies, one of the things that is very interesting to do is to actually experiment in a sense that we actually make the most of it so that there is public acceptance of technology. And of course, then you can import some of the things that are happening in industry, some of the things that are happening commercially can be actually imported in the admin domain. But at the same time, you can do the opposite. You can actually show to the industry that we have some very highly valuable data that they can be used in a way that makes a very big difference for people's lives, not only in public services like health or social services, but also other things, the way we actually organize as organizations, efficiently. I think there is a great opportunity, but this all means investing heavily. Without investment, there's nothing that going to take place.
I guess I couldn't agree more with you. Now, you've already beautifully answered the last question, which is that of public involvement. Thank you for doing that. I'd like to give everybody else a chance to briefly comment on that as well. So if we could keep those answers really short, because we're getting very close to the end of our slot here. So Thea, what do you think in terms of what would be the best case scenario regarding EU public involvement in this crucial ADR domain? What could the EU do in order to steer us on a path that Albert just says is actually crucial for making these European technologies happen and making them successful and competitive?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question. I think for me, what I see is that there are a lot of technologies. All these technologies are being developed for people. So we should actually try to involve people. We should try to make them part of, have co-creation workshops and design processes that will actually involve users. We are developing those technologies, but also using those technologies, because for me, artificial intelligence and all those are just buzzwords, are just tool in our palette. But the way we think about the problems, it's what Chiara said. It's not about the technology. It's what's the problem that we are planning to solve, and then how will we apply this technology. So I think it needs to come. The whole shift in the way we think needs to change, because we are thinking the same way and trying to solve the problems that we created. So we need to rethink how we are planning to design and use these technologies. So I would love to see much more public involvement, working with people who are developing all this technology in order to get something that is really human-centric, rather than just claiming that it's human-centric.
Great. So maybe just running studies and writing reports isn't quite enough towards that goal. Too bad that we lost Andrea to talk about that. Chiara, what do you think? What would be key to getting a best case scenario regarding EU public involvement, and hence then also the success of ADR technology made in Europe?
Yeah, I think that for us, it's actually pretty simple. It's like our core messaging, actually. Cities are really great engines of transformation at the local levels. They're the level closest to the citizens. They're the ones that are responsible for making your waste collection more efficient, for reducing the pollution in the air that you breathe, and delivering culture and housing services and so on. So cities have increasingly started investing in their digital transformation. They create specific departments, they appoint chief innovation or chief digitalization officers and so on. But they still lack resources in terms of funding, and they also lack very often internal competencies, because let's not forget, this is a sector where private sector employment is usually a lot more attractive than the public service conditions that cities can offer. And so a lot of cities have very interesting projects that fail to be scaled up and picked up and replicated in other European cities because of this lack of funding. And so an optimal system is one in which there is support in Europe in terms of funding and in terms of scaling up the successful solutions that cities are already implementing in their own particular municipality, because it's much easier to replicate something that somebody has already done and pooling resources than trying to try to invent 5 different models for managing traffic in 5 different cities, or 3 or 4 different building energy consumption modeling systems, and so on. So working together and pooling resources at European level is something I think will be key to delivering the digital transformation.
Excellent. And of course, I can't help but notice that organizations such as Eurocities are a great vehicle for achieving that, right? So probably they just need a bit more support, right, in order to do that job even better, I would suppose. Reinhard, moving over to you. Last but certainly not least, I happen to know some of what you think about this, because EU Robotics played a key role in developing this moonshot proposal, which very much talks about what could and should be done in Europe in order to be successful in ADR. So I'm wondering, is there anything within that that you would like to highlight, or anything completely different that you think needs to be done in addition to that marvelous moonshot focused on the kind of generative AI technology that we currently don't have, but that we would all like very much?
So I think regarding the moonshot, you are totally perfect in the position to explain whatever it is to, let's say, the policy and politicians. And this is something which needs to be complemented by going out and really involving the public, and not only the players who have the money. On the one hand, you need to convince the public side to invest quite a lot, and this is the goal of our moonshot. And on the other hand, you need to go out with small activities like our European Robotics Week, where we have decentralized national coordinators, because when you want to reach people, you cannot do it with policy papers drafted in Brussels and circulated in English only. You have to have your local network where you go, where you reach families, where you reach individual people who might be a user of technology, either in the public or job environment or in the private life even. And this is something I think which is a model that is taken up in many other areas. You see a lot of coding weeks and other things, and just showing what's possible and giving the hands-on experience even with the youngsters. I think this is something which will finally make the transformation, even if it takes a generation to educate these upcoming engineers. But there is still a tendency that people are skeptical about going in this direction for their professional life, and this needs to be changed.
Excellent. So we have an emphasis on investment, including major public investment, on education, and having those who actually will shape our future in a position that they can shape it responsibly, and is sticking to our guns when it comes to the rights and needs of citizens and keeping the human in the center. Beautiful. Thank you all very much. I see that Philip has reappeared here on my screen. I'm sure he's been there all the time, which means that now it's really time to thank you all very much for your valuable contributions, for the time that we were able to spend together today. I hope for you this was as valuable and insightful as it certainly was for me. And with that, I'd like to thank you once again, especially thank Albert for the very nice keynote and also for his contributions there. Thanks to Reinhard, thanks to Chiara, and thanks to Thea, and thanks to Andrea, who unfortunately had to run to Brussels to work further on the things that they can only do there. With that, this is the end of block 3, and I look forward to seeing some or all of you sooner or later in real life. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.